Alright, we started this piece last night and tonight we're going to move a bit further through. Focus to get us started tonight is going to be our foliage and then moving on to the water. Building up over the block-in that we got done in the live stream in the previous video. I'm just going to use a base mix of phthalo blue, a bit of magenta and some warm yellow to get a nice rich green to start off with. And also a dribble of orange into that mix just to temper it. Anytime I'm making greens, I like to use a tiny bit of orange in the mix. Just gives it a bit of a bite. Tends to make it a bit more natural. As you can see, this green's a little bit richer than what we were working with last night. Coming in with a finer brush so I can start dropping in some suggested detail. What I want to start with on this pass is building some of the darker markings through this foliage before laying the next layer over the top. Now we can really start working the directional marks along the headland here to get that moving off into the distance. Coming forward, we need to warm up some of those shadows. So I increase the amount of orange into that green mix that I'm working with. Using blue to cool down and the orange on the other side to warm that same mix up. Just going to throw some little touches off the tops to start suggesting some trees on the outcrops. Just about here, there's an old building that I actually used to teach out of many years ago up on the cliff. It's one of my favourite spots when I was teaching to work from there. Especially in the summer months, we'd get out on site, literally setting up in the car park and looking down over this scene that we're painting here to paint some nice little studies of the sunsets working through. So I've just dropped some white into a variation of the same mix that we're working on here, and that's going to start giving me some of the lighter markings against some of this foliage. I won't be completely covering everything I've got, just touches. The whole point of doing the layering process is letting little bits of each previous layer show through as you work forward. To enrich the next layers. Starting to get in some key darks up in this top front corner nearest us. We get a little bit more definition in these areas compared to what's happening in the distance. To help play with the eye and push us back into that visual area. One thing I'm forever telling my students is don't be afraid of rough marks in your scribbles. Things don't have to be clean, they don't have to be perfect. The whole point is you're trying to express what you're seeing in front of you. And if it's too clean and too precise, it sort of loses the feel of what you're aiming for in a lot of cases. Just coming in with a mix of my magenta with a little bit of white, plus some of the muck that I've been using through the foliage to start suggesting some little highlights, edges, branches, things like that. It'd be very easy to grab a watercolour liner, for example, at the moment and start knocking these in, but I try and resist that urge as much as possible. Prefer to try and get a few of those marks in using the edge of a flat instead. Starting to suggest some of the buildings out here in the distance. And along this sand edge here, We've got a whole heap of beach boxes as well, which we'll be focusing on shortly. I'm going to continue just getting some of these little buildings marked in at the moment. Just variations of lights and darks. I'm going to cool down the preliminary mix here as I move my way back. Drop in some lighter blues, a bit more grey. There's actually a road that comes down through here, and all the main shops of Mount Martha sit just in through this area here. Start marking in some of the distant beach boxes just here. Simplicity really is the key. Don't try and overstate everything. In a lot of cases you can do a lot of work to do what you need to do with very simple, basic marks. The more complex you make that mark, generally the more it takes away from the freshness of the scene. That's building a lot of texture through all those areas at the moment. Next, I'm going to start dropping in some lights in against the cliff. Catch where the light's hitting some of the outcrops here. I didn't want it to be too intense, so I've taken the orange but also dropped a tiny bit of that foliage green into it and then used white to control it. Just helps it push back into the distance a bit more. And at the moment I'm just going to use it to clean up the edge of this sand through here. You just need to keep pulling that area out a bit more. Just toning it all down a little bit at the moment, and I'll pull the cleaner colour back over the top of that in a second. Just bear with me for a moment. I'll wipe out this brush. This little flat's done a lot of work tonight on what we're seeing.